日本史学習に最高にもってこいのサイトサムライアーカイブスポッドキャストへようこそ。美しい自然にあふれてる縄文時代から波乱万丈な幕末まで全時代を網羅して日本史の隅から隅まで一緒に語り合いましょう。では早速日本史の世界へ。
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Samurai Archives podcast. This is Chris, and today we're continuing our discussion of the Shuri Castle fire that took place in 2019. Before we get started, be sure to check out patreon.com/Samurai Archives to see how you can support the podcast. And as always, thanks to our supporters. All right, let's get started.
Anyway, so, as it stands today, they're still allowing people into this, what we might call the Ninamaru, like the secondary area, the Shisha no Una. And from there you can peek around the Hoshinmon, which is the main gate that finally does lead into the main plaza. The Hoshinmon was largely maybe 75%, 80% untouched by the fire. And today they're allowing visitors to kind of peek around the side of the Hoshinmon, and you can see into the central plaza. And I'm really glad that when I visited a few weeks ago, I was nervous that they might not let people see, at all. It might just be closed. But I'm glad that they're allowing people in because, number one, the prefecture does need the tourist money, and they need to do whatever they can to, have tourists still want to come. But then also, I think hopefully by allowing people to see, the ruins, to see the results of the fire, that, maybe it can inspire a little bit of, even if it doesn't inspire actual monetary donations, that's fine. But just sort of getting people to understand what was lost and kind of instilling something of the emotion of it. So in any case, there's a whole bunch of other sort of outer areas of the castle that are still completely untouched. The sort of outer gardens and the outer walls and stuff like this. And today it's been designated a public park, and you walk around and you walk your dog and you whatever, and so there's quite a bit of space that's still untouched. But what did burn down in the fire tragically was the most central parts of the castle. So the fire started at the Seiden, the main hall, which incidentally in Okinawan is called the Momo Urasoe nu Udun.
Wow.
Yes. So Momo Urasoe might be translated as something like Momo is 100, and Urasoe is something like following along all the harbors, or something like this. So anyway, and Udun is Goten, so it's a palace, right? So Momo Urasoe Udun is a palace that rules over the 100 harbors, or a palace where all of the harbors follow subordinate to that palace, something like this. Anyway, and the Seiden is the most iconic building. If you've ever look up Shuri Castle on the internet or whatever, that's probably the building you're going to see. The one I mentioned a moment ago that just sort of covered in red and a little bit of gold, and I think 33 dragons across different parts of the facade, and with 2 stone dragon pillars, which are actually unique to Okinawa. They're not a Japanese or a Chinese thing, or even really necessarily a Southeast Asian thing. They're kind of unique to Okinawa. These sort of stone dragon pillars, which used to flank the stairs leading up into the Seiden, and it's kind of freaky to see these stone dragon pillars, maybe a little bit kind of blackened by the fire, but still very much there, and the entire building behind them is gone, just absent. So in any case, and right in front of the Seiden is this plaza called the Una, or Oniwa, right? The Una, which is where officials of the kingdom would stand or sit in rows according to their rank for various, royal ceremonies, when they were bowing down to heaven or bowing down to the king, or engaging in different kinds of ceremonies, and they used to, and they still are to the extent that they can, reenacting a lot of these ceremonies, New Year's ceremonies, reenacting the investiture of the king by envoys from the Qing Empire, things like that. But anyway, so to either side of the seiden, either side of the main hall, you have a northern hall and a southern hall. So the southern hall, which is typically known as the Nanden, but in Okinawa it might be known as the Fei no Udun. The southern hall was built in a kind of Japanese style, and this is the building where officials from Satsuma would be received if they were, being offered a banquet or whatever it may be. The kingdom would receive these Satsuma officials in this Japanese style building with tatami rooms and so on and so forth. And then and that building also housed some sort of a guardhouse and some other kind of studies and offices, administrative rooms for the castle. And then opposite it, on the other side of the plaza, is the Hokuden, the northern hall, also known as the Nishi no Udun, because even though Nishi means west in Japanese, Nishi means north in Okinawan. So it's the Nishi no Udun, and the northern hall. And this was a Chinese-style structure, so it's a kind of interesting, asymmetry. When you stand in the plaza, you have a Japanese-style building to one side, which is mostly kind of unadorned wood, a kind of plain wood Japanese-style building, and then on the other side, on the north side, it's this completely red Ming-style building, and that's where Chinese officials would be received. And of course, the Chinese are used to keeping their shoes on and sitting in chairs, so they did not have tatami rooms, there. So it's a different situation. And the northern hall is also where Commodore Perry was received and banqueted on a few occasions. So after things were rebuilt, in the last 20 years or whatever, the southern hall was used mainly for galleries, displaying artifacts and things like this. And the northern hall came to host primarily the gift shop, if I remember correctly.
So it's been too long for me to remember. Did they try to reproduce the sort of Japanese style in one building and the Chinese style in the other?
I would have to go back through my photos and try to remind myself precisely what it looked like. But one thing I can say in general is that, generally speaking, they really did try to recreate the interiors. Generally speaking, the interiors were recreated to look like they might have looked historically. So, one thing I've been thinking a lot about since this happened is that I think a lot of castles, and obviously it depends on which ones exactly you're thinking of, but I visited recently, this is maybe a little bit random, but I visited recently Norwich Castle in East Anglia, in sort of eastern England. And Norwich Castle is a museum housed inside the shell of a castle. You walk inside, and from the linoleum floors to whatever, it's a modern building. The floors, the walls, the lighting, the fluorescent lights, it's a modern building. It looks like a museum. It feels like a museum. And you forget that you're even in a castle until you go into the one section that's all, just kind of stone ruins, and you kind of see the actual empty shell of the castle. And Shurijo, they did have artificial lighting, and they did have, I don't know if it was linoleum or stone or what it was, wood floors, I suppose. But it functioned in some ways like a museum. They had display cases with glass and like this. But to a large extent, at least in the seiden, in the main hall, if not quite as much so in the north and south halls, they really did try to recreate kind of the interiors and not just the exteriors. Obviously, you have to change some things around in order to accommodate that many tourists coming through all the time, and to make them into gallery spaces. And a few of the gallery spaces, of course, were climate controlled, and they had automatic doors and stuff like this. And of course, the whole place had to be wheelchair accessible. So there's obviously changes being made on the interiors, but to a certain extent, at least, I think they really tried to recreate that. So it's those three buildings: the main hall, the southern hall, and the northern hall that were really kind of the brunt of these three halls were completely destroyed in the fire. Well, the main hall and the northern hall were completely destroyed, and the southern hall is, I don't know, maybe 50% destroyed. And then there were three or four other buildings that were behind the main hall that were sadly also destroyed in the fire, and that includes sort of some areas that were a little bit more for the private, personal use of the king and of the royal family, the king's study, and places like that. The Ouchibara, which is the Okinawan equivalent of the Ooku, so the whole kind of court ladies, women of the court kind of area, which was finally rebuilt just within the last 5 or 10 years, was also destroyed in the fire. Yeah, so I mean, to just sort of say it over again, it's these 6 buildings, the most central buildings where administration happened, where the royal residence was, where all the major royal ceremonies took place. It's these sort of most central buildings that were sadly destroyed in the fire, but for whatever it's worth, all the gates, all of the outer walls, all of that stuff is almost entirely untouched. So,
since you actually visited it after the fact, I don't know, how retrievable does it look? Does it look like there was just a massive amount of damage, or it's kind of hard to kind of picture the amount of damage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard to put into words, I guess, but
I mean, obviously the main building is gone, but at what percentage of the entire complex would you say was burned up?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know percentage-wise, but I would say, all the main buildings, the buildings that you could actually walk into, the buildings that house displays within them, are almost all of them gone. Pretty much just, razed to the ground, just like gone. And what survives, I mean, thankfully it's not the entire park, the entire however many hectares that is. The gates, all the gates of the castle are intact, and the outer walls and things like that. So at least that much is still there, and you can still walk around and see kind of the complex as a whole. I mean, if we want to compare it, I don't know, even without naming a specific castle in mainland Japan, if we imagine most castles in Japan, they haven't rebuilt, the palace buildings anyway. They've only rebuilt the tenshu, right? The tower keep. But in any case, and Shuri never had anything like a tenshu. They never had a tower keep. It's a very different style of architecture. It's a different type of building, type of compound. But in any case, the equivalent would be to say, as if all the main palace buildings, the Goten, the Honmaru Goten, the Ninomaru Goten, whatever, were destroyed, and the tenshu, right? So the actual main buildings that you would visit are gone. And the gates survive. I'm in no way an expert at how much money or how much time anything in particular costs. Sort of the intricacies of construction work. But it looks, from what I saw, it looks to me like there's a lot of rubble to be cleared away, and that's hopefully not too big of a job. It's just get in there and clear it out. Although the difficulty, of course, is getting trucks up there and stuff like this. I think probably part of the reason that they had trouble fighting the fire to begin with was because it's so hard to get fire trucks up there, close enough to the interior of the, the most central part of this complex. Because just like a lot of castles in a lot of parts of the world, it's built on the top of a hill, right? It's built, if you're walking into the castle, you're walking upstairs and around a turn and up more stairs and around a turn, right? So how are you, I mean, it's built to be defensive as well as to be, for other purposes. So I don't know how you're supposed to get fire trucks up there. But anyway, they will figure it out. They know what they're doing. They will clear away the rubble. And then it's just a matter of, actually rebuilding these buildings, which they're primarily wooden buildings. There's a lot of push to get them rebuilt in wood and not in concrete, to get them rebuilt according to traditional, style. And so, it'll be in wood, but obviously you still have to do all kinds of modern stuff with, plumbing and electricity and climate control for the galleries and things like that. So I don't know the intricacies of that, but the whole process, I don't have the numbers offhand. I mean, the whole reconstruction in the 90s cost, millions and millions of yen, and it's going to cost that much again. But they've been raising a lot of money, both through, private donations, from the community, but the prefectural government also has a certain amount of money that they can spend, and the national government has committed that they're going to spend, what they're going to spend a lot to support this project as well. And from what I understand, the key obstacle at this point isn't even the money, really, thankfully. But the key obstacle at this point is simply getting the materials and getting the having enough materials and having enough trained artisans, master craftsmen, to rebuild it the right way. So a few of the obstacles that have come up have been, number one, especially for the main hall, they need a certain number of central pillars, that they need, really large hinoki trees. I think hinoki is cypress. So traditionally, or whatever, in the past, they used cypress trees, hinoki. And the last time that they rebuilt it in the 90s, they, for one reason or another, they couldn't get large enough pieces of hinoki to build these pillars anywhere in Japan. And so they imported them from Taiwan. And now I've seen some news articles saying that because Taiwan has strengthened their sort of forestry protection laws in the last 20 years, that they won't be able to get the hinoki from Taiwan anymore. But then I think I might have heard a rumor that the Taiwanese government might be willing to make an exception, to show their friendship with Okinawa or something. So that's one piece. And then another aspect is the tens of thousands of terracotta roof tiles that they need to rebuild these buildings. And there's been some debate as to whether the roof tiles were traditionally black or red. When they rebuilt it in 92, they wanted to use red roof tiles, this kind of maybe slightly orangish red terracotta pottery color, which I guess is very closely associated with Okinawa. And it was very difficult to fire those roof tiles, to fire them hot enough to get them to the right, to hardness, the right consistency, to fire them properly, while keeping them red and not burning them to black, is what I've heard secondhand. And so it was, an extremely difficult process. Only a very few, master potters, master ceramic artists know how to do it. Some of them have since passed away or have simply gotten old. So you need a lot of clay, and you need a lot of kilns, and where are you going to get enough, and so on and so forth. So that was a major concern. Very shortly after the fire, I forget precisely what it was called, but very shortly after the fire, the Okinawan Ceramics Artisans Guild Association issued an official statement saying, we can't do it. We just can't. We don't have enough people who are expert enough. We don't have enough materials. It can't be done. Since then, it's been, a few more months, and at least one studio, one ceramics workshop has said, we've gotten started. We're going to do our best. We're going to make as many roof tiles as we can, and it's going to be okay. So that's another piece of it. And then the third main one that comes to mind is the lacquer work. So first of all the roof tiles have to be lacquered, because terracotta is not particularly water resistant, and it rains a lot in Okinawa. You get typhoons and so forth. So all the roof tiles have to be lacquered to make them waterproof. And you have to do it a certain way with traditional lacquer. Well, it doesn't, even if it's not traditional, but you have to know how to handle lacquer. It's a particular material, And then the entire building, more or less inside and out, has to be lacquered, as well as the reproduction of the royal throne, these calligraphy plaques that I was mentioning before, certain other objects to go inside the castle. And so it involves a lot of lacquer and a lot of specialty skill and techniques. Lacquer is made from the sap of a tree, which is, I've been told, and I might have this wrong, but the lacquer tree is somehow related to poison ivy and poison oak. So the lacquer itself, the material itself, is very aggravating to the skin and difficult to work with. So it takes specialty skills to be able to work with it. And then after that, painting, and I mean the carpentry itself, right? Carpentry and the sort of architectural skills itself, much like temples and shrines in mainland Japan, rebuilding it in a particular way, to join up the pieces of wood. I'm not sure if they really used no nails, if they really did build it in that fully traditional way in the 90s, but I think they might have. And so, cutting all the joins to join up the proper way, and lots of discussion about whether, of course, they're going to bring in Japanese artisans, right? Experts who are involved in building and repairing shrines and temples and other buildings in mainland Japan, who have that expertise. But at the same time, if you leave it completely up to them, then number one, the building might turn out to be not quite Okinawan style. It might end up being more Japanese style than intended. And then number two, sort of just the basic, the feeling, the idea of, that this was or was not rebuilt by Okinawan people, by Okinawan hands, right? So there's a lot of those kinds of issues involved. I've not heard any definitive. I've not happened to read anything that definitively gives a timeline for, when the construction is expected to be finished, but they've officially begun, whatever that means exactly, I guess just clearing away the rubble or whatever it is, but they've officially begun the process, and the prefectural and national governments have, I don't know if they've fully agreed, but they've certainly proposed to press forward rebuilding it exactly the way that it was before the fire. So, there's been some criticism of some people talking about, that there should be a little bit more space for rediscussing, like maybe we should rebuild it a slightly different way, or, now that there's been more research on what the history of the castle was, maybe we should think about whether to use black roof tiles or red roof tiles, or whether to rebuild it, to resemble the 17th century version of the castle instead of the 18th century version of the castle, or something, different discussions, different room for discussions. But from what I understand, some people are saying that they want, a little bit more room for discussion, but then the governments are kind of just pressing forward.
Wow. It's an involved process. But it seems like Kumamoto Castle has kind of been going through the similar situation.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly never, I don't know. It's been interesting to see, because, in my work on the early modern period, we generally don't see these kinds of, what strikes me is, I mean, definitely interesting in a certain way, but at the same time, very mundane, like administrative, bureaucratic stuff between the city governments and the prefectural government, and between the government and the people, and what is the Shuri Machizukuri Kai, the Shuri sort of town community or association, versus the Shurijo Fukugen Kai, the rebuilding of the castle association. What does each different association want, and how does each different group? I don't know. I mean, I've also spoken to some indigenous activists who have a particular idea about Okinawan identity and Okinawan culture that is not quite the same as what a lot of other Okinawans would say about their identity, and they want different things out of the castle. And then also, on perhaps perhaps the most mundane level, a lot of Shuri residents, a lot of local residents have complained that tourists coming to and from the castle bring too much traffic, and there's been traffic jams, and there's been all kinds of problems, and there's too many tour buses on the small, tiny roads of Shuri and like this. And so therefore, now is an opportunity to redesign where the parking lots are going to be, or how they're going to be organized, or something.
And maybe putting in a fire lane too.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't jump to conclusions. I don't know precisely whether they didn't have a fire lane. Maybe they completely did have a fire lane. I don't know. I don't know about that. So, and I guess this is probably a fine time to touch upon the fact that, I mean, I think one of my first reactions was to say, I am not an expert at fire protection and what should or should not have been done. Some people were jumping to conclusions about, there was no sprinkler system inside the castle. Like, which I don't know. I'm not judging. I guess I don't know if this is an obnoxious way to obnoxious place to stay. At first glance, you say, how the hell is there no sprinkler system inside the castle? And because because it was a newly rebuilt building, because it was not a genuinely historical building, it was therefore not subject to the same requirements that they had to have sprinklers, right? And they also were not eligible for funding from the Bunkacho, from the Agency of Cultural Affairs, to receive money for that, right? So the national government gives money to Horyuji and Todaiji and Kumamoto and whatever, they give money to support the installation of fire protection systems and whatever it is for historical sites that have been officially designated as historical sites. And after the fire in Notre Dame, the national government, I think, tripled or quadrupled the amount of money that they were going to give out to historical sites across the country to help strengthen their fire protection systems. But Shuri Castle is not a historical building. It's a modern recreation, and so it's not entitled to those monies. But anyway, there was no sprinkler system inside the building, and everyone was going crazy about this. But what I realized afterwards is they had a different thing called the drencher system, which means they had some kind of automated system that shoots water at the building from outside. So they did have something. So that at least existed, and it doesn't seem to have done enough, right? When the guards first discovered the fire themselves, right, in person that night, and they first discovered the fire, it was already too hot. They grabbed the handheld fire extinguisher, and it was already too hot to get close enough to the fire to use the extinguisher on it. So yeah. Anyway, so we know that much. I don't know whether they did or didn't have fire lanes, or whether they should or should not have done more. I saw some photos of fire trucks sort of perched on like the next hill over, shooting water. Obviously, extremely high pressure fire trucks have the ability to do this, to shoot water in extremely high pressure jets across that gap at the castle, and I'm sure that helped to some extent. But they I don't know whether they really, I shouldn't, maybe I spoke too quickly. I don't know if they really could or could not get trucks to the site. And then they had a brand new fire protection system in one piece of the castle they had a new fire protection system in the Uchibara, in the sort of Ooku area, that had just been installed, and they were going to officially test it in December. So it was a month and a half before the testing, and it was not operational just yet at the time, is my understanding. I might be misremembering that wrong. So some of it's just timing and accidents. And if the fire had happened to happen 3 months later, then this other system would have been operational. But they don't believe that it was arson or anything like that. They don't have any evidence that there was anybody, on the property that shouldn't have been. And initially they were saying that it might have been due to some kind of electrical fault, that some electrical box or electrical system may have sparked or something like this. But I don't know, official investigations, afterwards, right? The afterwards investigations have ended without officially determining the cause of the fire. So, I don't know. Some people obviously are reacting to that to say, how can you rebuild without knowing the cause of the fire? It could all just go
That's a good point.
Again, right? But I don't know. So I'm just reporting what other people have said. I'm not really sure where I stand on any of that. Yeah. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I mean, I really, I don't know.
Yeah, was it 4 months ago?
It was October 31st. So, yeah.
Wow, it feels like longer. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's still, a new situation. So I guess it's a timely podcast, even though it has been 4 months. Yeah. I think it's timely enough. It feels like it's been a long time, but actually it hasn't been, I guess. So, and it's incredible the amount of, as soon as the fire happened, I suddenly felt like, I should write something about this. I should comment on this. I should, research it in some way. And the amount, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but the amount of stuff that I've found about Shuri Castle, like the amount of pamphlets and just, I don't know if I'm gonna ever read all of it, but I've obtained so many just pamphlets and booklets and different things about the history of the castle, and you just get deeper and deeper into it, and you learn so much more about I started reading newspapers from the 1980s and 90s about what people were talking about with the about the reconstruction at that time, and it's fascinating, but it's endless. It's absolutely. I went and picked up just 3 days, right? So the castle actually opened November 1st, 1992, right? So I went and plucked out the articles from just 2 newspapers for November 1st through 4th. And that alone was, partially because it's in Japanese, but it took me forever to read. I was reading through these things, articles and op-eds and different pieces of different aspects of the whole process. So anyway, and then I found a booklet that I forget what year it was, maybe 1987 or something. There was a big benefit concert to raise money for the reconstruction, and I got the booklet from that benefit concert on Amazon. So there's just endless amounts of materials, to read about people thinking about the castle in different ways at different times. And anyway, right.
Anyway, so that's it.
Wow.
So whatever.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for another episode of the Samurai Archives podcast. Tune in next time for another exciting episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please check out patreon.com/Samurai Archives to see how you can help us out and see all of the benefits that you can get. All right, that's all for now, so see you later.